Bonjour. The good news is that's all my French. My wife is French-Canadian, and she always corrects me every time I try to say one word in French. So thank you for having me here today. The topic for today is cognitive commerce. And I expect that a lot of people would struggle with defining what is cognitive, and then how does cognitive relate to what we do as a profession of commerce. So I thought we'd take some time here this morning and introduce you to those concepts and how that could impact your users, being the business users, the marketers, the merchandisers, supply chain operations, as well as our customers, the people using our digital channels to experience your brands, and how we see this as the next evolution of the way you interact with the consumers as a brand.
I am a technological breakthrough.
This morning, I read over 4,000 articles on leukemia in less than a second.
たった数週間で新しい言葉も話せるように。
Thousands of new laws were published yesterday, and I'm up to speed on all of them.
I know every detail of every public quarterly report in the last 20 years.
I can spot diseases before a patient displays a single symptom.
I can understand euphemisms, idiosyncrasies, and complex metaphors.
I can tell what's going to sell out before it ever trends online.
I can forecast the weather in over 2.2 billion locations at the same time!
I can grow with you.
I can coach you.
Enrich you.
Enlighten you.
And I'm just getting warmed up.
Hello, my name is Watson. Together, we can outthink the limits of what's possible. Welcome to the cognitive era.
So, I love that video just because the little girl in the pool makes me think I have a lot more to learn. I'm assuming everyone's heard of Watson. And that's the engine behind our cognitive experience here that we're going to be talking about. And there are two things that I wanted to highlight from that video. Number one, this is a journey. This is not, hey, do this and you're done. This is something that's evolving. Number two, if you think about cognitive, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of analytics, there's a lot of process, but that's not cognitive. Cognitive is the ability to learn. And so you'll hear that as a theme when we go through this conversation here. So from a learning perspective, I look at it from the perspective of you as merchants, especially in a digital channel, but also the physical world. We have lots of data. If you ask a lot of the business users, they don't need more data. They need to figure out how to access the data, how to do that in a timely fashion, make the data actionable, and drive a business, drive those key performance indicators. And so I look at structured data. That's the simple kind of data. That's the data that's in nice columns, nice rows. Then we talk about business analysts being able to generate reports. And then those reports on Monday you look at. And then Tuesday, you think about what you're going to do. And then Wednesday, you meet and talk about what you're going to do. And Thursday or Friday, maybe you do something. And then Monday, you figure out, I did 5 different things. What did it do? Which action had an impact? What action didn't have an impact or hurt me? So that's the easy data. And then we all hear about, we're generating so much data. Whatever the statistic is, we're doubling the now data in so many months. And that's the data being unstructured that we don't even know how to begin to give visibility. More reports, action taken around all that unstructured data. So we look at this, and if you don't realize, we're currently very comfortable in our second generation of computing. The first generation was computation. We have computers that will add and subtract. The second generation was conditional programming. That's what we're all used to now. Conditional programming is where the business says, we have ideas. We want to have these requirements to deliver a solution, and you document all the requirements. And then you go to IT, and IT programs to all those requirements. So if this happens, do this, else do this, then do that. And if something changes, you go back through that cycle. So what's interesting there is that's where we get into the model of things are changing fast and faster. So how quickly can you keep going through these cycles of conditional programming? The answer is you can't go fast enough. And the reason why I love this market is because the consumers are experiencing things, and they're expecting more and more. It's forcing us to adapt and change quickly. That's where we come to the third generation computing. About every 10 years, IBM makes the big bet. At one point, the big bet was a PC, and I think that took off quite well. If you think back, most IT organizations, mobile was not on their agenda as a priority 5 years ago. Now everything's mobile. So our next big bet is cognitive. That's the third era of computing. With cognitive, it's less about knowing what the future is going to be and programming every condition to that requirement, and more about having the right foundation and data and let the system learn with you. Not take over, but you directing the system, telling you where it's right, telling you where it's wrong, well, what data do I need, and have it learn and take that philosophy across the entire business. So you don't have to hire more and more people to get things done.
Is for 1200. This person is appointed by a testator to carry out the directions and requests in his will. Watson.
What is executor?
Right.
Same category, 1600.
Answer. Very double.
That was the moment when I knew it's over.
Watson went on a tear. Watson.
Who is Franz Liszt?
You are right.
What is violin?
Good.
Who is the church lady?
Yes. Watson.
What is narcolepsy?
So a couple years ago, an American game show called Jeopardy! I cannot win this game to save my life, but it's amazing where you had the best champions over the years from this game who can read, well, in this case, an answer, and they're very deep in innuendo, these answers, and our human mind having the amazing ability within a second to come up with the right information, the right question in this case. So this was an exercise for the big bet of putting Watson in this place to try to beat the human mind. It's kind of like the chess game back in Big Blue days. And what happened was, if you look at the 5 days back-to-back that this happened, there was the probability at the bottom here that shows when Watson would respond. And the hardest thing was to teach a computer not to respond. Because you think about it, there are different APIs, ways you access Watson. Question and answer is just one of the 30-some APIs now. 2 years ago, this was the only way to interact with Watson. And what happened was, over the days of the game, it learned to have more confidence, and it started taking more risk. And it got in, being able to respond and doing better. So we've gone far beyond this. This was a test. After this was when we invested as a total separate business in IBM of cognitive computing. So that takes me to the next step. So now you have the ability for an amazing amount of data to be accessible. Now, what do I do with it? So from where I go here, and by the way, I'm proud to say that I'm going to have Kent join me here in a moment. I'll introduce him. He's the creative guy. I've got less words on my slides than him. But if you look at where we go from here, it's about how do I take this ability and now give power to the business users in what we do with e-commerce and digital channels. And then we'll go to the consumer experience. So just here's a few examples. The point I want to make is cognitive sounds very futuristic. And it is. We've got more to learn. We've got more use cases to figure out. But companies are doing things with this today. So here are a few examples of brands that are doing this. But also what I'll first focus on is example of what we're doing from a business user perspective to empower you. So step one is business tooling. So when you look at a commerce platform, there's lots of data. You can have lots of analytics and things like that. There's spreadsheets after spreadsheets. There's dashboards. There are data reports coming from your back end, logistics. There's a lot of data. So the easy thing is to then overlay that data on top of the very visual experience that our merchandisers and marketers expect these days. Store performance, week to week, none of this is cognitive. This is just a better way of representing your data in a usable format so that you take multiple emails, spreadsheets, and put it in one place, including inventory data, SKU assortments, and things like that. Well, the next step is help me. Okay, there we go. So where you start to see cognitive come into play is you have over here a worst performer, second worst performer, how this relates to plan. So you start looking at this and you say, here's one of my worst performers that I expected to do well, and I'm selling 30% less than plan. As a merchandiser, that's a problem. I'm going to have a lot of inventory left at the end of the season, right? You don't want that. So what cognitive starts doing is start giving you ideas on some of the problems and suggested actions. So in this case, it's taking ratings and reviews. Things where one of my clients, they have hundreds of ratings and reviews per product. That's almost too much. So for one of the other APIs, the way you talk to Watson, is sentiment analysis. So for Watson to be able to take the sentiment people have, whether it's on your ratings and reviews, Twitter, Pinterest, blogs, multiple data sources, and be able to consolidate that and give you a visual way of saying, here's what people are saying, their sentiment about those products. Not just all the words, but positive, neutral, negative. Because maybe you have a manufacturing problem. Maybe one of the colors is bleeding in the wash. And this is what people are saying about that, and that's going to cause an effect on your sales. So just an illustration of bringing the ability for a system to take the cognitive abilities and represent data in an actionable way to a merchandiser. So another example is a lot of times when you look at reports and data, us humans, we have a theory, and we go and find data that fits our theory. We filter out all the data that doesn't fit our theory is what we normally do. Spreadsheets filtering, reports that we use all day. So another way of looking at data is to explore it versus just reporting on it. So now that you have all this data, what Watson will do, remember that Jeopardy game of Q&A? It looks at the data, and it actually starts suggesting questions to you that you may want to consider. So now, as you click through, you can start drilling into data in a way to explore versus just seeing a report. So that's the way we take a Jeopardy game and make it actionable for the business. And every one of those questions are dynamically generated. No one sat there and said, here are the 10 questions that everyone will get answered. It could be different based upon the data. In addition, you can write your own questions, and the data will dynamically represent that in diagrams, maps, pie charts, bar graphs, so that you can then get ready for your meetings, but also take action on that data. And then also getting down to the demographics and the sentiment as well. So looking across geographies, looking into cities, zip codes, all based upon your data, and being able to then see if there's an impact on your business. And the last thing, before I move to the consumer side, is then to predict. So it's easy to say, if I run a promotion I can drive more sales. But is it a discount? Is it a free shipping? Is it something else with the sentiment and something else with the data going on that would have a bigger impact? So being able to actually look at, if abandonment rate is the key indicator you're going after, what other attributes would have an impact? And for the system to actually start predicting and suggesting to you, hey, it may not just be that promotion of X% off, but it may actually be you have a shipping problem. You have an inventory problem, and it starts recommending other actions that you may want to take together. So this is where you start getting into that second dimension and third dimension kind of thinking for the business. So with that, and by the way, we have a plan for Q&A at the end here for questions, so if you have any good ones, start thinking about those.
Your body has a story to tell each day. And there's an advantage in knowing all the factors behind how you feel. But the real power is knowing how to make your next day better. Introducing UA HealthBox, your connected fitness system, and your key to exercising smarter, feeling better, and living longer. Until now, your health may have been the least examined subject in your day-to-day life, but HealthBox is powered by UA Record, which collects and analyzes the data points from all of your digital devices.
So this was announced at the Consumer Electronics Show last month in Las Vegas. So Under Armour is probably a brand everyone's recognized. And everyone's had the Fitbits and the Garmins and the scales that collect data. That's about as far as they went. So what Under Armour did differently is, what do we do with the data? It's more than just reporting it back to you. Hey, you did 10,000 steps a day. Hey, you did 6,000, get walking. But there was a little thing in how do you feel? So that's not very data that you can measure very easily. But what it does is behind the scenes, Watson is taking this information, very structured data, plus how you feel, and starts looking at demographics based upon your health condition, all the other inputs, but also your personal activity, and starts telling you, do you realize what you did 3 days ago, 2 days ago, 1 day ago that made you feel better? And then I see the trend where you didn't feel as good, but I see what you did in those previous days that trended you down. Less sleep, less activity. So now it's a different dialogue with the consumer. Plus, what kind of data is Under Armour getting about you, right? With privacy and all that in consideration. The net of this is, what is Under Armour doing? Why are they doing this? It's not to sell more scales. It's to have a deeper relationship with the consumer that they don't necessarily control because they sell through other distribution channels, retail channels. The reason they do this is to hope that you have a healthier lifestyle. If you have a healthier lifestyle, you buy more shirts and pants. That's why they're doing this, because they're running a business. They need to sell more stuff. Here's another example outside of the retail.
Hi, Connie.
How may I help you? I am Hilton's newest concierge in training, thanks to a pilot project between Hilton and IBM.
Hospitality is a really interesting use case for Watson because inevitably you have people who need information. They need to find a restaurant, they need to find a park, they need to get directions.
We operate in a very crowded industry, so innovation is key. Innovation has to help solve problems operationally. Innovation has to help our customers. It's an opportunity to really delight customers in ways that they don't expect.
So that was Connie. This introduces the concept of what we're doing in cognitive is not all generated by us at IBM. It is about over 1,000 partners that we have that have built applications and use cases on top of a cognitive commerce platform. So we partnered with SoftBank in Japan. There's two things there. Number one, Watson learned Japanese. That's a hard language. Number two, they had a robotics company. So you saw Connie here in Japan, it's called Pepper. At that point, Watson got eyes. And that opens up a whole new way to interact. Watson started in the medical industry, learning about diseases, helping with cancer, AIDS, and helping doctors solve those problems. Well, now Watson can read x-rays, but also, in this case, I treat this as a B2B example where, as a business traveler, I have a very close relationship with Hilton. And when you walk up to Connie, because that desk is full, there's a line of people, there's nothing more frustrating if I just want a simple answer to wait in line, to be able to have an interaction and get my answer. Well, Connie can actually see you walking up and knows if you're happy, if you're frustrated, and could already be thinking about what are the possible outcomes and have a dialogue with Connie to get your answer. So that's another application there of how you can use the way of this market is changing. It's not about how can I fit more processes into another mobile device? How can I get down to 5 inches, so many centimeters? But now it's the dialogue with the consumer. So my last example, and while I'm doing this, I'll introduce Kent here, is about North Face. Again, we're using brands as an example. Come on out, it's okay. They won't bite.
Thank you.
We're using brands because we all see these things. And so North Face, and I'll let Ken talk more about details, experimented with this and did a pilot. And how does this change that interaction, and how did it change how the business viewed their data to prepare for this? And then, by the way, what Kent's going to talk about, that was step one. It was not the end game. It was not the objective they had. The objective is to be announced. So with that, Kent is the CEO and founder of Fluid, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you. Thank you. Give me that.
It may work for you.
Yep. Very happy to be here today. Couldn't be more excited to be in Monaco. I have to say this is the most beautiful conference location I have ever been to. It's fantastic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call our cognitive commerce journey. We work very closely with the customer of the North Face. We've been working with them for almost a decade. And our business is really focused on solving brand and consumer interactions. How can you create a better commerce interaction with your consumers? How can brands interact in a more engaging way? So we were looking at the industry. We've been in the market for a long time. We've had a deep partnership with IBM. And we're looking at what is the big challenge today? What is the problem that we think we need to solve? And we look at the trend. 72% of consumers are influenced, engage in a digital research while they're purchasing, whether online or offline. So digital, as you all know, you're all in this room for this reason, is influencing a tremendous number of transactions. They're using it, consumers are using it to find products, to research products, to get advice. But the reality is finding the right product is not easy. In fact, it really sucks. So I don't think it's changed in a decade, really. You've got long navigation trees, you've got basic keyword search, bad filtering, and ultimately a lack of reliable advice. And I think the best example of this is actually Amazon, right? The granddaddy of all e-commerce giants. So if you look at this page, which also has not really changed in a decade, this is a search for the term camera, a fairly basic search term on Amazon. If you go there today, this is what you'll get in the US market. 24 million results for camera. 24 million. What is anybody supposed to do with 24 million results? That's impossible. Amazon does what most of us do on our sites today. They use filters, but let's look at these filters. There's over a dozen filters just for cameras, dozens of checkboxes, color swatches, stars, sliders, you name it. I challenge anybody to really have a positive user experience doing that. So let's compare that to what happens in store today. When you go in store, you talk to a store associate, and you have usually a good experience. If it's an educated store associate, you can go in, you engage in a dialogue, a conversation, a one-to-one conversation with that store associate about your specific needs. They ideally ask you good questions and quickly get you to the right product for your needs, and you can buy that product with confidence. That experience really does not exist online today. So we said, how can we change that? There we go. So we started looking at trends. What was happening? What are things that we need to be aware of? And the first is the rise of digital assistants. Siri, Cortana, Amazon Echo. We're starting to become more conversational. These types of applications are changing how we engage digitally. We're going from a point-and-click interface to a chat-based, messaging-based interface. So that was a really important trend. And the data backs it up. Today, 35% of smartphone owners say they have used a digital assistant in the past month, and that number is growing rapidly. This year, In the US market, Gartner is predicting that $2 billion in transactions will be conducted purely by digital shopping assistants. That's a rapidly growing market. It's a small piece of the pie now, but it's growing very quickly, and I think a very important trend to be aware of. So at the same time we were looking at this trend in the rise of digital shopping assistants, through our IBM relationship, we got introduced to the Watson technology. We said, hey, this looks pretty cool. It's got amazing natural language processing capabilities. And as David was talking about, the ability in the video showed, the ability to process massive amounts of unstructured data very quickly. So we took this technology to our partner, the North Face, whose mantra is never stop exploring. We love working with them because not only are they into product innovation, but they're a technically adventurous brand. They believe in innovating digitally as well across their products. And they had problems on their own site. They were looking at, boy, it's a tough process to find the right jacket. How do I find the right apparel? How do I engage consumers in an effective way? So we started having this conversation about how do we have a dialogue? What is the opportunity? And we all realized that really what we're talking about is turning personalization on its head. Typically, personalization today has been about crunching a lot of data, looking at a lot of insights, and then servicing the right products that we think are right for the consumer based on some algorithms. What we think the next generation of personalization is really about a dialogue, engaging in one-to-one conversation in a unique way with consumers to present them with unique products based on their specific needs, again, in a one-to-one, totally dynamic conversation. So with that, I'll give you an example of what we've developed for the beta. So as you can see, this is an actual, this is a video clip, essentially, of the actual interface. You can find it on the North Face site today. So the first thing it does, it says, where and when will you be using this jacket? I'm going to Whistler in December. So I know some important information. Now I'm going to ask, are you looking for a men's or women's jacket? Okay, there we go. It's a gift for my girlfriend. So in 2 quick questions, I've got some very important pieces of information. I know the place they're going, I know when they're going, and I know who it's for. We're able to go out and then do some additional information, pulling data in through Watson on the weather conditions that time of year in Whistler. We know it's for a female. So we have context for the kinds of products we're going to recommend. So, and we didn't say, girlfriend. That's a great point. We did not say female. They said girlfriend. You could say nephew. Synonyms are a really important part of this. You could really literally put in anything, and it will know whether you're talking female, male, youth, or boy or girl. So that's a really important piece of the puzzle. It really changes that natural language processing piece that allows people to engage, again, naturally and have a natural dialogue. So we get our initial results set back. And Watson at this point has helped us select a range of products. You can see they're very different styles. Some of them are more fashion-oriented. Some of them are more athletic-oriented. Because we don't really know enough at this point. This is the products that are recommended just based on the data we have. So we're going to ask a few more questions. And I should point out that this is not a scripted conversation. This conversation is generated totally dynamically based on the inputs from the consumer. So you might have a totally different conversation every time you come to the application. So I'm going to ask it, what activity or sport will you wear this jacket? So we're going skiing. Important piece of information. Now that I know the activity, the jackets have all updated. So these are jackets are all appropriate for skiing. They're weighted. The system weights the jackets based on the inputs I have and what we know. So the larger circle is higher match, smaller circles are lower match. But again, the product's set dynamically updated based on that input. Which color do you prefer? Fan of green and blue. So I'm going to show you primarily green and blue jackets that are in my collection. I'm going to ask you questions a little bit more about the features and functionality. Do you want a down or synthetic insulated jacket? One more click here. Synthetic. So again, the product set updates. I can decide I'm done. I like what I see here. I'm going to try to find a little bit more information about the products. So importantly, you can see the circle again matches the weight of the product. You can flip the products over to understand why we selected the products. What were all the criteria? Why were they meaningful? Why is this jacket a high match or a low match? What criteria do we match against? I can also review the data inputs from the conversation. So you can see exactly what we pulled from the interaction we had with you to feed the system, and I can change those inputs at any time. So that was the initial application that we've rolled out with the North Face. It's been in the market for about 6 months. We've since rolled it out for 2 other customers, one a global beauty brand and another a large gifting company in the United States. And we'll share, of course, some interesting results with you guys, which I know you're interested in. Let's see if we can get this to move forward. We seem to be frozen, which is appropriate for the North Face. Small pen. There we go. Okay, results. So we've seen so far a 65% average click-through rate to product detail page, 2-minute average session time, an average of 5 questions per session, a 2.7% lift in conversion rate for people who use the application, 2.5 out of 3 overall customer experience rating, and ultimately 80% of consumers would use it again. And the important things we take away from this metric, as David was mentioning, we're just at the beginning. So what we really want to test with this is, would consumers engage with this? Would they use it? Would they answer questions with the system actually asking the questions and not an individual? And the answer has been an overwhelming yes. The results have been very positive. So we're learning a lot. We're improving the system. And what we did learn is we really dug into the data. We started to segment the responses we were getting for customers, is that this type of application provides the most value for the people that need the most help. If you're a North Face customer and you know exactly what jacket you want, it's not the best thing for you. You can just go find that jacket exactly on the site. But if you have some questions, if you need some questions answered, you're not really sure, this provides the most value for it, and we actually see those numbers skewing. The second thing that we learned that we're really excited about is, you mentioned the amount of data, and this is just another contributor to data, but there's a tremendous amount of what we call data exhaust generated by this system. So every conversation we record. So on the left of the screen, you'll see a sample conversation. It's actually a real conversation pulled from an interaction with the site. When and where are you going? I'm headed to Telluride this weekend for a ski trip. Great, that'll be fun. How often do you ski every year? About 5 times. Who's this for? I need it for my wife. She's a size 10. So that's just a partial sample of the conversation. We're taking all that data, feeding into the database. We know a lot about that consumer in a very short time. We know that they're going to Telluride. We know when they're going. We know what kind of skier. Are they ski 5 times a year, so they're a moderate skier? We know that they're shopping for their wife. So we can use all that data. We use it to inform our conversations and make each subsequent conversation with the consumer more personalized. But that data can also be fed into other systems within the enterprise to improve overall personalization efforts because you know more about your consumer. So take a sip of water here. One of the things we want to talk about, because it's really a journey and we're really at the very start of this journey, I want to talk a little bit about the learnings and advice. We've got some key takeaways. The first is that learning requires lots of teaching. A lot of people expect cognitive systems to really be great out the gate, but the fact is they are not brilliant from day one. A cognitive system is like a student, a new student, right? You have to teach that student, the student gets smarter and smarter and smarter over time. So essentially, when the system starts out on day one, it's dumb. You've got to spend a lot of time teaching, you've got to learn, you've got to train it. And you need to have that expectation that you need to put a lot of effort in up front. The results deliver downstream, but it's definitely a process of teaching. The second is you need to go deep on your product DNA. And what we mean by this is you really need to think about your product data. You need to understand what consumers are actually asking. You need to spend time doing research in stores, finding out what questions are people really asking, not what do I think they're asking, but what are they really asking, what answers do they really want, and then you need to go back and look at your product data and understand, does that data going to meet my customer's needs? Am I going to be able to answer the questions? Is the system going to be able to provide the answers based on the data I'm providing? We found most oftentimes that it requires a lot of new content creation and a lot of restructuring of content from consumers to really get it into a format, or for the system to be able to provide the right kinds of answers to the right kinds of questions. The fourth point is transparency. Cognitive requires transparency with consumers to function effectively. And what we mean by transparency is a lot of times when you start working with a brand or a retailer, they have a certain perception or a certain way they want consumers to perceive their products. And really, this is about being transparent with your consumers and really understanding that you need to reveal to your consumers how you're matching products, how you're rating products, how all that information feeds into your systems, really getting the consumer being completely transparent about those processes, which is often very difficult for brands to do, but it results in a better customer experience. And the last piece is trial and error. Cognitive systems require a lot of iteration, as I talked about, and you've got to expect some errors in the process. But most importantly, you have to be on a path. We really have almost a radical agile process. We do daily iterations with our customers, daily updates of content, daily updates of code to really refine and optimize the experience. And it's a very quick, agile process, but you've got to get into that methodology to really help the system learn, adapt, and grow. So I thought I'd end. We're going to show just a little clip of what's coming with the North Face. We're launching this actually in 2 weeks. It's our mobile-first approach. We think it's a good example of where this technology is going, how it can transform interfaces, and I think really provide that next-generation engagement with consumers. So you can see we're basically using the same interface paradigm in a mobile platform. It's quick and easy to engage with. It's very similar to how people engage with text-based UIs today. And again, same type of information, same background code deployed in a different way, providing a great interface for how people can, again, engage, quickly find products that are very relevant for them. So we're really excited to roll this out. Hope you all try and use it. The last thing I'll end with is that we are 100% certain that AI is going to transform consumer interactions. We're at the very start of the journey. This is by no means the be-all, end-all. It's the product of about 12 months of work, and we're expecting it's evolving rapidly, getting better and better every day. And I think if you think about where mobile was 5 years ago, like you talked about, there is no question in my mind that in 5 years, you will see just a completely different engagement model than you have seen before with consumers. And it's time to start exploring how it can impact your business today, because the businesses that are spending time investing in this technology, getting their organizations ready for it as the technology evolves, as Watson gets more sophisticated, are really going to see big transformations in their business, are going to be the most poised to take advantage of this in the coming years. Thanks.
So we thought we'd take some time with questions. I'll lead off with a couple for Kent. As he mentioned, we see a lot in the past industries. Who hasn't gone to a conference and mobile? I think this is irrespective of what interface, especially since mobile, you're limited by the screen, the touch, and everything will become more of a dialogue. As you've worked with different companies, not just North Face, but other brands, what do you think they learned about their data in the process?
Yeah, it was really interesting. As we worked, almost every company we worked with on this technology, it's forced them to rethink their product data. And I talked about it a little bit earlier, but they needed to really look at what questions does consumer want answered, and how do I put that information forward in a meaningful way? So an example for the North Face would be warm. That's a meaningful phrase for a consumer, but what does that really mean to the brand? How do I rate my jackets on a warm scale? So really thinking about, okay, what are the questions that consumers are going to ask? How do I look at my data? And I think everyone's surprised that they don't actually have all the answers that they thought they had, because they're used to basically projecting to consumers in terms of how they want their catalog structured, how people navigate it, what filters, but consumers don't really interact that way when you give them the chance to ask questions. So you need to have a much broader scope and be prepared for a much sort of broader set of answers, which often requires more content to be made and a different sort of weighting and hierarchy of products.
Sounds like a few surprises for the brands themselves. And is this similar across all categories?
I mean, I think that the interaction paradigm is very similar across categories. So we've been focused in retail, but we're exploring some opportunities in financial services and insurance, healthcare, the robot earlier in hospitality. I think what AI systems will be great at, there's sort of, of course, the big data, insights, crunching. But again, it just shows how that technology can be used to really create, again, a new interaction paradigm where it's really about dialogue and conversation.
And we spent a lot of time on the brand manufacturers, retailers, because it's easy to see that. Where do you think this is going in terms of other interfaces, other business models?
I mean, I think the sky's the limit. I mean, I really feel that you will be having these kinds of interactions and dialogues. I mean, if you think about your phone, I mean, the phone is becoming more and more commonplace, right? Everybody is finding ways to interact with it. And the easiest way to interact with your phone when it actually works, granted Siri doesn't work that often, but when it does, it's a great experience, right? And you can actually just talk to it, and you get the answers you need, and it really helps out. And so I think, you're seeing all kinds of disruption, and I think the hospitality example is a great one, right? There's a lot of companies that are getting in that space. You're starting to see getting text-based messaging in your hotel room, and you're interacting on a message-based interface, and all that is really, in some level, powered by these AI systems.
I think we have someone passing a microphone around, but if you want to raise your hand, they can get you a microphone. I think this is different, the way people are thinking about how they work with the experience, but also the data. What kind of resources?
Yeah, it's probably the most important resource our clients have needed are, again, focused on the content, because AI systems, cognitive commerce, cognitive computing, when you're talking about unstructured data, you need people that are experts in the content. They can learn how to look at what content's out there, what content to feed into the system, how to create new content that will deliver the best results. So probably the most important we found is somebody that's really can become a content expert in integrating with these AI systems.
And a lot of times I find that you already have those kind of skills, but then it's just getting deeper into it, and then also breaking the traditional ways of thinking about your content, a structured content, and no, we're going to force everyone to go down this path. Any questions? See?
Hello, David. Hello, Kent.
Hello.
Just a question for you, well, one for each, actually. Kent, can you tell us if the system has crawled the product attributes naturally, or did you have to generate the match between, for example, insulated jacket and the answer to a question? Did it made it naturally?
We've developed, as part of our technology, we've developed a way to basically make that dynamic match between the product attributes and the content, the question the consumers are asking. And that's kind of the magic of the system, is really creating that dynamic matching so that the products are weighted appropriately and depending on the questions. And really, the most important part of that is obviously, what we've also learned is worth noting is there's a big part of the training of the system up front was really what kind of questions and answers are people expecting, what kind of questions are they going to ask when they're shopping for a jacket, and then pulling the product data in to map to it. Once you have that sort of understanding of how people shop for a jacket or a car or an insurance policy, even though the jackets change every season, the shopping process actually does not change that often, and the kinds of questions people ask is the same from season to season. So it becomes actually fairly easy to update.
Thank you. And the second one is for both of you. Are the questions being dynamically generated during the training phase, or are you like kind of creating the process yourself, or is Watson giving you suggestion about you should maybe ask this or that?
It's a great question. So when we start, typically we're starting with a core set of questions that we've learned that the system needs to ask, and then Watson helps us optimize those over time based on what it's learning from the consumer interactions. But we typically see, it's part of the training process, is that day one of education is helping it learn what are the kinds of questions they're going to be asked and what are the right answers.
And what I would say also is this can look like things we've done today in the past of guided selling. And this was a pilot. This is the first step. So there is no direct relationship of you have to answer this, then this, then this. That's conditional programming. So this is more dynamically asking the basic questions, but then the experience goes different ways based upon the dialogue.
Right, that's a really important point. There's no hard-coded decision tree or logic in the system, right? And so it gets better and better the more it's used and the more data we get in there.
And what I normally see is businesses are limited by resource. We talk about the data analysts, but when you put conditional thought process of a Q&A tree, just as one example of Q&A, then how do you expand this across all the categories? Well, you're not. If you do it in the old way, you're limited by how much resource you have go across your categories, where this learns and then starts going across the categories with you, and you have the ability to give it that guidance, that learning. Question?
Based on your experience, do you consider that now you're at a stage where your solution is as good as a sales, or did you even go beyond that?
Well,
did you get any surprising answers that were even better than what you would have thought?
It's a good question. I wouldn't say at this point it's as good as an in-store sales associate. Maybe as good as your worst in-store sales associate. You know, and it's hard to say that this, maybe 10 years down the road, this could be as good as your best in-store sales associates. But the goal here is what we want to do is we want to be able to allow brands to take the best of the in-store sales associate, not replace those people, they're incredibly valuable, be able to take their knowledge, and they actually, with our brands we're working with, are helping us train and inform the system, and then provide that at scale so there's a consistent brand interaction. But I think there's a ways to go to get it to be that sophisticated, but that is definitely the goal, and we see a path to getting there over time.
And I also see, like just last week I was working with a company that if the system could learn from the best associates, they need this kind of knowledge to be shared with people that are selling their products that they don't even employ. So you think about the different distribution channels. You think about call center reps that are hired for seasonal peaks. The quantity of turn of employees. So if the system can be, let's say today, as good as an average employee with 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months understanding of the products, could we make that new hire as good as a 5-6 month employee, day 2, 3, 4, 5? And then if it can learn from the best store associates, that's where it starts getting its degree in your product categories. Is that a fair way of
explaining? That's a great, good answer.
Up there.
Hi, David. Hi, Kent. I have a question for Kent about the North Face experience. I understand it's one of the very first experience of Watson with an e-commerce website. You gave some figures saying that the conversion rate was 2.7% for people using Watson. But what is the improvement you measure?
That was the improvement, actually. That's the lift we've seen so far.
Okay.
So that's the improvement above it.
Okay, but comparing to the average conversion rate of the website, how much is the improvement?
So the improvement is 2.7%. That we've seen. So I can't give the actual conversion rate number, but it's improved by 2.7%, which we feel is reasonable. Of course, it's always, people battle out for a 10th percentage point improvement, but we feel like there's a lot more room to go with that.
Okay, and do you have other KPIs about satisfaction?
Just the data that we've showed, and we've actually, at the end of we've got the qualitative data, so basically quantitative. At the end of each user session, we ask people to complete a survey. So we do have more detailed information, but really the key factor for us is that 80% of consumers say they would use it again, 2.5 out of 3 positive experience rating. And it's just a very quick survey because we don't want to bog down the consumers with those. Okay. But we're getting directionally positive information that consumers like engaging with it. I think the most important metric for us is actually the number of questions that people are willing to answer. So at 5 questions, and that's what we found is about the optimal session to get to the right recommendation. And people seem very willing to do that without dropping out of the process.
Okay, thank you.
Please hit.
Hello, David. Hello, Kent. Another question, you were discussing, Kent, about the DNA of the product and learning very deep this DNA. How can we make this for a retailer who is selling a lot of different brands? And do you already have clients on retail?
Yeah, we're actually working with, we just started working with a large retailer, the gifting company. It's a really good question. And it is definitely a fair amount of work to go through and optimize the content. I think that what you'll start to see as these cognitive systems come into place is that the creators of the content, the manufacturers, the brands who are supplying you as a retailer will have content that is more optimized for cognitive systems. I think we also, for a lot of the retailers, it's their unique spin on the content. It's their take. So if you walk into a great retailer, that sales associate that has a really good understanding of a specific product, even if it's not your product, as a retailer, you'd be selling someone's product, that's a real asset for you in the sales process, and it's figuring out how can you capture that information and layer it into your own sales process. So I'll use an example that's not anybody we're working with, but there's a site in the US called Crutchfield, which is an absolutely phenomenal consumer electronics shopping experience. And they've got great sales associates. It's a pure online site. So if we were working with them using this example, their site is full of content that their sales associates create in terms of recommendations. the goal would be to figure out how to pull that information in a way that the system can use to then provide that unique Crutchfield point of view on the products themselves, on what's the right recommendation.
Excuse me.
I don't know where, I can't see.
Blinded.
Maybe I'll go then. Yeah, you were mentioning it's difficult indeed to have the right content and attributes. Do you think the system could learn from just the criterias and then refill the attributes? So then the attributes would not be done by a young person trying to do zillions of attributes.
With lots of spreadsheets. And
yeah, exactly.
Right,
but put it back based on the physical things. Like we know that it's these grams, etc. But then the attributes will come back.
Yeah, and that's a pretty interesting take on it. I hadn't really thought about that, but I mean, I could definitely see the system learning over time in a way to populate. It's certainly a possible thing to do, and we talked about how we're capturing that data. And I think that what it might be really interesting to do would be to figure out how to then sort of re-inject the more qualitative aspects that we're learning in these conversations and attach those to specific products. It certainly would be technically feasible.
If I look at it from a different perspective, a lot what we're talking today about is that customer experience on navigating and finding product. There's a whole nother cognitive use case around commerce where merchandisers are deciding around assortments and pricing. So there's pricing engines out there that will scrape, especially your commodity price product. But being able to put those rules in, that's more conditional programming. But for the cognitive part to be able to learn your confidence level. So where I'm going with this is we have the ability in the business experience side to start suggesting pricing based upon your competitors. You don't have to be cheaper than everybody. You may have a different value proposition, loyalty program, et cetera. The thing I see is that then the business is a little worried about letting a system take over. So that's that whole confidence level. And what we find is that as people then start getting the queue of here are 20 things to approve, and you keep saying approve, 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 approve. No, I reject that one. Why? And then we see that people start letting the system take over, so stop giving me 20 approvals, give me 5. I'll let you take over another 20% of my approvals. So that's where the system starts injecting content. Another one is when you think about the supply chain. You get all these orders. You can fulfill from your warehouse. You have physical stores potentially, store-to-store transfers. How to optimize that dynamically based upon what's going on right now, not based upon yesterday, not based upon every hour looking at things, and being able to optimize the balance of orders by inventory, but also the ability for the logistics, the stores, the warehouse to be able to handle those and to deliver, hopefully meeting the expectation or beating the expectation for delivery time. That's a great cognitive example because there's so many other details that come into play with weather, transportation, customer expectations. So it actually starts promoting to the customer, I suggest we do a pickup in store because I can get that to you, whatever.
All right, you said you were going to cut me off, but we're getting the hook.
Oh, there you go.
So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time and attention.